Okay, great. Great. Well, welcome to our kind of separate training on STAR for grazing lands. I think we should probably do a round of introductions, since we might not all know each other here. I'm Helen Silver. I'm a consultant with Ground Up Consulting. I know a lot of you, but if you want to just, if you're able, put your name and affiliation in the chat for folks to see, that would be great. I think and if you are either with a conservation district, an eligible entity, or if you're a technical assistance provider that's helping out those folks, that would be great. Great. Wonderful. So, as I said, thanks for showing up for this individual training on STAR for grazing lands. We realized that we didn't get to spend as much time on this in the January training as is probably necessary. So kind of today's objectives are really for us to help everyone prepare for rancher consultations. We're going to walk through what that looks like. Familiarization with the STAR form and scoring sheets for grazing lands, and most importantly, answer questions that you guys have on this. That's really hopefully going to be the driver. So if you have questions as we're kind of going through some of the slides, just no need to raise your hand, just shout out.
And Helen and I have done this many times, but we always do it together. Yep. So I'm sure there will be some intrusion from both of us as we proceed.
Yeah, absolutely. And Ryan, I just assumed everybody knew you. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, I apologize. I kind of went into that with the same assumption too, as I was perusing the list of people who are here. Most of you look familiar to me, or almost everybody looks familiar to me. So my name is Ryan Taylor. I am the Soil Health Program Coordinator for the Colorado Department of Agriculture. I'll be the person that you can contact if you have any needs, and who will try and keep you all in line.
Awesome. Great. So I think most of you know and are familiar with the fact that particularly in this soil health program, we talk about the 5 soil health principles for croplands. They're not totally obviously inapplicable to grazing lands, but we will go through why we've taken a different approach with STAR for grazing lands. But just for everyone to kind of keep in mind that on any land, what we're really trying to promote is soil armor, so reducing erosion from wind or rainfall, minimizing our disturbance, encouraging plant diversity, whether that's bringing it back up to how it would be under more natural conditions or through crop rotations, not applicable here, continual living root, and then obviously for rangelands or grazing lands, we're already integrating livestock. So that's, a given in this situation. So a lot of this is probably going to be review for folks, but the first step in the soil health program and engaging with producers will be for conservation districts or eligible entities to kind of get to know the operation with the producer. For technical assistance providers, we're hoping that you can do 1 or 2 of these consultations with the conservation district at the beginning. But the the point of the consultation form, which I'll run through in a minute, is to familiarize yourself with the producer's operation, identify the area and the soil health practices that the producer would like to implement in the context of croplands. We talk about this in terms of a field, but for grazing land, that's really the area or the management unit that the producer will be focusing on. Obviously, we'd like for these consultation forms to serve as a way to facilitate a conversation about soil health with the producer, and really importantly, understand what the producer's goals are for the operation. They also are going to cover what have been some past successes that the producers have had with soil health, barriers to adoption. So maybe if there's things they'd like to be doing, but they feel they haven't been able to in the past, and how we might help them achieve those goals. In all of this, we really want to stress producer privacy. And I know that's topmost in our head, but, stressing with the producer that none of this will be shared. And then I think, most of you are familiar with this already, but the consultation is really going to be separate from technical assistance that the producer will receive. So the consultation is really a conversation where hopefully as an outcome of that, the producer will have identified an area, some practices they'd like to try, versus the technical assistance, which is really how to actually begin operationalizing that. So the consultation form is a couple pages long. We've excerpted a few here, but really what we want to get is some basic area information. So, oh, I'm sorry. I will, Ryan, do you have the ranch consultation form? Why don't we come back to this and start with the grazing land forms? Ryan, I'll turn it over to you and we'll come back to the consultation forms.
Ryan, you're muted.
Cheese and rice. Sorry, everybody. So I think what I'd like to do is come back and kind of revisit the field form and the scoring sheet after we have some context of what we're going through. So Helen had kind of started talking about there's some differences between the STAR for cropping systems and the STAR for grazing land. And the reason for that is severalfold, but when we started doing stakeholder engagement, we found out very quickly with talking with producers that practice-based approaches just were not going to work. And so what we came to understand through talking with folks at ARS and CSU and all the producers that Helen and I spent 2 months driving all over the state and having house calls with, was that the one thing that the ranchers have, their number one best tool is their brains and their ability to adapt. And so it was through that engagement that we started realizing that practice-based approaches weren't going to work. And so we started focusing on these process-based approaches, the process of decision-making and incentivization. And so for STAR, when we looked at it for the grazing lands, we looked at, planning monitoring, and adaptive decision-making became kind of the foundation of where we wanted to go with the process of implementation. So it's consistent with the STAR goal, which is to reward producer effort. Obviously, we can set ourselves up for success, but if it doesn't rain, sometimes it can all be for naught. So these operations are just too diverse across the landscape to have a practice-based approach as well. And unlike Star for Croplands, where we identify a specific field for use, we're really hoping that this can apply to the whole operation. And there's, many of our ranchers have leased property. And so, what we were thinking was, we don't want Star to supplant what ranchers already have, all the planning that they've done with BLM and NRCS and Forest Service and different folks that they have leases with, but we're hoping that they can start to integrate on their private land, and that there should be some, it should be able to interact well without anybody stepping on anybody's feet, I guess was the point. This process, like I had alluded to earlier, was developed by a committee of rangeland specialists from USDA, NRCS, and ARS, CSU Extension, and soil scientists, state agencies, consultants, and producers, with additional feedback from, more than 10 producers. Helen and I went out to 8 different ranches all over the state. Each time we went through this, it was a pretty heavy endeavor. And we're grateful to all the folks that participated, because it was at least 3 to 4 hours, in some cases more, going through the field forms and the scoring sheets and getting feedback from folks that are actually doing this stuff on the ground. I wanted to give a shout out to Nick Charchalis, the CACD Ranching Board member. His feedback was crucial to what we've developed. Philip Anderson at Colorado Cattlemen's Association has been an advocate for us and a great partner, and his feedback was also really special to get. We've had Leopold Conservation Award winners, a Crowley County rancher who chose to ranch there because, in his opinion, if he can do it there, he can do it anywhere on planet Earth. And Robbie Valley as well. She took a lot of time to help us iron out some of these things. So the major sections of the STAR grazing land forms deal with the management plan, the grazing plan, record keeping, drought management, drought preparedness and response, and then obviously monitoring. The management plan, which is guiding their overall decision making. We found that there are wide-ranging, that's the word I want to use. There's a wide range of how people write or manage their management plan, so to speak. We have, handwritten forms. We've got stuff. A lot of folks just have it in their head. And then, of course, all the way up to folks who've been through ranching for profit, or any, NRCS program where they have an extensive written management plan. And we'll get into this too, but drought plans kind of exist along that spectrum as well. We do incentivize a written management plan. It does not have to be NRCS quality. It could be, so we've seen handwritten maps, hand-drawn maps, and pretty extensive documents that are handwritten. So we don't want to try and disincentivize anybody, but it is always nice to have something written down. I think in one of our meetings somebody had said, I have a financial plan, and whether or not they follow it or not, at least they have that out there as a goal, right? And it'll, when it pops up, it constantly stares at them, keeps it at the forefront of your mind, so to speak. And then obviously, with these plans, who's involved, right? What's the monitoring program protocol? Is there a resource inventory? And then how often does it get reviewed? There is still a way for folks to get points if they don't have any written documents. So those folks, excuse me, we're hoping not to alienate anybody just because they don't have something written down. So obviously we all understand, well, hopefully we all understand why grazing land is important, right? This is kind of the nuts and bolts of how our livestock move across the landscape, and the impact that they have. And so although, we've heavily incentivized the written grazing plan just because it forces somebody to think about what they're doing on a more consistent basis. But again, no particular formats required. It should have a resource inventory. It should have a process to assess land health. And this is critical. Everything that we do with the grazing lands needs to have a reference condition. And so we'll, at a later date, we're going to have in-person trainings on March 29th and March 31st. And I'm hoping we can have a little bit of classroom training with Jeff Herrick from ARS, who can talk a little bit more about this specifically, but using something like Land PKS or RAP or something like that to create a reference condition. Because when we're out there, if we're in the fourth year of a 4-year drought, everybody's land is going to look hammered. We don't want to look at that piece of ground and say, oh, that looks terrible. Well, it may, right? But so does the native range around there that is quote unquote in pristine condition, right? Because without water, nothing's going to grow. And so, the content of the grazing land needs to contain periods of grazing, deferment. Yearly reviews are really nice. It allows the producer to move as that situation changes. And the monitoring plan is really gonna advise that overall. It's important as we move through time, the review of your grazing plan, your drought plan, all those things become critical as things start to dry out and frequencies of rainfall and intensities change and things of that nature. And again, folks can still get points for non-written grazing plans. And there are a lot of folks out there that assess land health in a unique and interesting way. It just, it's just all in their head. Record keeping should be a no-brainer. All of these ag producers are small businesses, and small businesses always benefit from having good record keeping. We as individuals have an idea of what's going on a decadal scale, but we've been out at ranches where people have dug pits and there's no A horizon. That's the top horizon. In the soil, it's usually dark in color. That's where the root system and the living mass above ground interacts with the mineral component below ground. And in a lot of cases, they're gone. And so the thing is, we might remember back 10, 20, 30 years ago, whatever, but most of that soil was lost 100+ years ago when the sheep came through and grazed everything down to its nub. And then the land was eroded, right? And then since then has been rehabilitated, but that A horizon is still missing, right? So record keeping is important because, I can tell you as we get older, I don't remember so good. But, we do go through cycles. We go through climate cycles, we go through weather cycles. And it's important to have that not only for ourselves, but for the next generation. It's also just good business management. This is also, a real opportunity for the NRCS programs. STAR kind of sets people up for success in NRCS programs, because especially here, if we start a conversation with somebody and they're like, well, we have some stuff written down, or we don't have some stuff written down, and we start going into, helping them with management plans, grazing management plans, drought management plans, which there's a new group of folks that are doing just that, helping people write drought management plans for their land. If a person, gets all that stuff going, that's kind of what the NRCS wants, to step into those programs. So it'll be seamless for them to go from our program to something that actually has quite a bit more money if they were to so choose. Obviously, the more records you have, the higher score you likely will have. And that's just because, these records, whether they're grazing plans, monitoring records, things of that nature. I have cropland producers that have soil tests that go back 50 years, right? I mean, all these things kind of put you in a better position to be successful. Drought management is critical. Helen tells this story about, you want to make your drought plan while it's raining. You don't want to try and create a drought plan in a moment of panic. It sets you up for more success if you have one already in place, because you have those trigger dates. You know what you're going to do. You can kind of see it coming and prepare for that. And again, we incentivize written drought management plans. Again, we want to see who was involved. If we saw something that said, a consultant XYZ wrote this and nobody else was involved in it, not that it's necessarily the case, but we have talked with folks who had those records, did not know what was in them. And so really what we're looking for here is, does the producer know what's in all of their records, so that, again, for your drought management, what are those trigger dates? What am I going to do? How am I going to handle this going forward? And again, there's still points in the scoring sheet and whatnot to award to folks who don't have any of this stuff written down. But this is, when we say this is an opportunity to start the conversation, having these records, expressing the importance of these records, that could be the beginning of the conversation, right? Well, I don't have any of these. Well, you're still going to get points, but if you did, this is what you'd be looking at as far as your score response. The drought preparedness and response. The big distinction here is that this only applies for declared droughts, right? Because if you talk to any rancher, they'll always tell you in a drought unless it's raining that day. I don't say that. I've had ranchers tell me that. But this is the only other caveat, is that the only time you're going to get a negative point, and correct me if I'm wrong here, Helen, but the only negative points allowed in the grazing land system is if you were in a declared drought and you had no responsive activities despite that drought. And again, if you see that, it's not a huge point deduction. It's just out there to kind of disincentivize that behavior. The monitoring, when we started, we had assumed it was going to be long term, right? What's the long term monitoring, and how is it going to influence the decision making? Because monitoring lets a producer know if what they're doing is working, right? And what we found out very quickly was that ranchers look at monitoring two very different ways, right? There's the long term monitoring that does let them know, what's coming and going. Is there something sprouting up that didn't used to be there, or something just disappearing? Maybe my warm season grasses are starting to disappear. And that's really, how do these fit into your goals? But likewise, there was this very short term, day to day, sometimes hour to hour monitoring that ranchers had need of to make sure their cattle were happy, right? And utilization, forage supply versus forage demand. Are they standing out there at the gate ready to move? Are they laying down? Are they happy? There was this very, very sharp distinction between short-term monitoring and long-term monitoring. They're both really important. The long-term monitoring, like indicating or interpreting indicators of rangeland health, or CRMI, line point intercept, those types of things, boot intercept, Those are all things that can tell us about, you know, the structure of the system, you know, is anything coming in or going out, and, you know, giving us those trend lines over time, right? Are we doing a good job? Are we not doing a good job? I think I want to go back to, so now that we've gone through that, as a TAP or a conservation district, you would come to the Colorado Department of Agriculture Soil Health webpage. You would navigate to the STAR forms, right? And here we have the field assessment forms and the scoring sheets for everything up here, right? So you might start here on the grazing lands. You'd fill out this information and move forward. Here's the instructions. I agree, right? This is basic information, and then it moves from here. It goes through, just like we were talking about, it goes through the management plan, the grazing plan, the drought stuff. And then what I think is the real powerful tool, right, is the scoring sheets, just like in the cropping systems. This allows a producer to assess themselves. And, you know, I was on the phone with Natalie the other night, and she said she'd sent some information out to the producers that she's working with, and they were really excited because they were looking on here and they were seeing things that had them jazzed, right? They were like, oh, we can do this, we can do that, right? But it's just really kind of important for you guys to understand, right? Look at the points that you get, you know, with who's
Ryan?
involved. Yeah.
Ryan, do we want to walk them through our color coded one?
Sure, we can do that. That'd be better.
Yeah, I
So,
think so. Do you want me to walk through it?
yeah, Helen devised this, and I love her color coding scheme. So she's a little bit better equipped to talk about this.
So this is not going to be the one that you see on the points are going to be the same, but the color coding is not what you're going to see on the website. But are there any overarching questions about the structure of the form before we kind of walk through the details on the scoring sheet? Okay, great.
You
So
can always put something in the chat too. If
yeah.
one of us isn't talking, the other one will most likely answer you directly.
Yeah, so, and we can switch back and forth between the Google form and the scoring sheet. But one of the reasons we wanted to show you the color coded scoring sheet is it'll help you get a sense of what we're prioritizing in the scoring sheet overall, versus without having to go calculate all the numbers independently. So to kind of start with the scaling, there is on the total sheet, there's more than 150 points available for the stars. So more than 150 points equals 5 stars. 111 to 150 equals 4 stars. 71 to 110 is 3 stars. 2 stars is 21 to 70 points, and 0 to 20 is 1 star. Kind of before we start going through this, you know, Ryan talked about the stakeholder engagement we did around this, and it was extensive, but Ryan and I are very aware that these forms are not perfect and that the point allocations are not perfect. So you all are going to go out and probably discover things that we either missed or where the point allocation doesn't add up. And so we certainly, you know, want that feedback from you guys. So beginning at the top of the scoring sheet, you know, the pink coding is stuff that we really wanted to highlight as very important and was worth a lot of points. Again, this is all based on the work we did with the Star Science Committee and then also with the producers. The green is very important. Blue it's important, but it's not going to be a make or break. And then yellow is semi-important. So it's things that like you will probably have if you know you're well along your soil health journey. And then white is unscored. So as you can see up here, the general information on the scoring sheet is not scored. A written management plan. So, you know, the way the scoring sheet is set up is basically one section is answer if you have a written management plan. And then it says, if you don't have a written management plan, skip to section 2. And that's going to be a structure that's common throughout the form. So that structure will hold for the grazing plan and the drought plan as well. We're very clear, hopefully in the instructions at the beginning of each of these, that a particular form, as Ryan mentioned, isn't required. So, you know, it doesn't all have to be in one document. It can be a collection of business records or annual reports maybe that were taken. Again, we're trying to be really flexible in this. But you can see here with the green that there is heavy weighting on the fact that you have a written management plan, who developed it. So you'll see, you know, you get points if you developed it with NRCS and with CSU and with a private consultant, but you get much more points if the rancher themselves was involved or the primary land manager. Additionally, you know, there are points awarded for involving a business manager, ranch employees, and family members. Yep.
Do you get multiple points if multiple people were involved?
Yes, you do. So you can kind of knock this one out of the park. Like if you really got everyone together, you can knock this one out of the park. And that's a really critical part of developing a management plan. You can see we've also really incentivized how often the management plan is being reviewed. So if you're reviewing it annually, you're going to get 4 points. Whereas if you're unsure or you reviewed it, say 3 years ago, it's going to be 1 point, and hopefully that spurs going back and reviewing it. We did want to incentivize people who developed it within the last year. So we gave 3 points for that. And hopefully that will be a flag that it's that it was good to develop it and good to keep reviewing it.
You know, something.
Yep.
As
go ahead.
well, as we go through this, something pops into my head. That, you know, if this inspires somebody to go and do some of this stuff, you know, unlike the cropping system where, you know, we do have practices and things are very static. My thought process is, it might be, you know, if you go out and visit with a rancher and they decide they want to do a lot of this stuff, it might be a good idea to come back at a later date and go through this if that works for you. Otherwise, in year 2, if they were to go do all this, get it all written down, I suppose is what I was saying, they would have a reevaluation in
Yeah. Yep. Dave, did you have a question? Oh, okay. Yeah, if you have a question, just shout out. One question that did come up for us was the scope of the management plan. What if I have several management plans for different parts of my operation? This is really one of those areas that was hard to define for grazing lands. And so what we really want to be focusing on here is a management plan that's for a cohesive management unit or area. It doesn't have to be for the entire area where the producer might want to try some soil health practices, but it should be a cohesive management unit. So you can see that pink was really important for us to have a resource inventory on the management plan and also a monitoring protocol. Most of the monitoring protocols, as you go through the form, are actually going to, questions are going to be asked in the last section. We do give some additional points for things like contingency plans for extreme weather events. That are either drought or not drought. So if you're going through this with a rancher and they don't have a written management plan, so they don't really have any records, which is, you know, could happen, you'll go to the section designated no written management plan, and you'll do that by just scrolling to the end of the page on the Google form and clicking next section. None of the, with the exception of email, there are no required answers on the Google form, so you shouldn't get booted out of it. So here with the no written management plan, again, we're really incentivizing who was involved in the conservation planning. So they might say, well, if I don't have a written management plan, you know, what do you mean by this? We might mean, you know, who's regularly involved in talking about managing the land, whether, you know, it occurs at an annual meeting or just casually. Is the property mapped? This doesn't have to be part of the management plan. It can be separate. And again, what we're looking for here is not necessarily like some fancy GIS map. It can be very much a handwritten map, just so folks can see, to show the extent of the resource that's under management. Your grazing plan is going to be where a lot of the points are gotten, as Ryan mentioned. As with the other sections, you're going to be asked if you have a written grazing plan, fill this section out. If you don't, please skip to the next section. So again, we're asking about a resource inventory, you know, and this is also a little bit broader than the resource inventory for the management plan, which is detailed in the Google form. And here's where we start talking about what processes do you use to assess land health. As Ryan mentioned, we really would like people to use a method based on reference condition, but we also recognize that there are other methods. So for right now, they are all 1 point. This is something we're probably going to be adjusting in the future, though. So your contents for your contents or requirements of your grazing plan, hopefully it does hit all these notions of periods of grazing, deferment, and rest, and why you might change your rotation. Treatment activities for each management unit, and then are you revising your grazing plan yearly? To clarify, this is not how often are you adjusting your rotation. It's actually going back to your grazing plan and revising it, which you might do at the end of the grazing season based on conditions experienced over the course of the year. So that brings us to this next one of how often do you adjust your grazing schedule? You know, most ranchers we talk to say I'm doing this every day, depending on precipitation levels or other factors. So ideally, particularly here in Colorado, where conditions can be so unpredictable, you're doing it every week or more. So with the non-written grazing plan, again, you can pick up some points if you are using a process to assess land health and adjusting your grazing schedule on a frequent basis. Any questions so far on this? I think this is a good time to actually bring up the Google form and have it ready to walk through some of the more detailed questions that aren't going to be apparent from the scoring sheet. So the next question is, the next section is around record keeping. Can you guys all see the Google form? These are the kinds of records that we're asking for. To be clear, the producer is not expected to show you these records as part of the STAR process. Oh, Vanessa, I'm sorry, I didn't see your hand.
Oh, that's okay. And maybe the answer will come as we go through this.
Mhm.
I was just curious for the grazing lands specific stuff.
Mhm.
Is this, is it meant to be for rangeland specific or also irrigated and or dry land pasture situations?
Great question. And I'm sorry if that wasn't clear. So it's for any land used primarily for grazing. So it would not apply, say, if you're grazing cattle on crop residues. And this was one of the reasons we decided to make it process-based, was because it would be, I mean, it's almost hard to capture any type of universal practice that would be appropriate for any operation, but particularly when you start bringing in irrigated pasture versus natural rangeland. So again, I'm really glad you asked this, because that's why when we took a step back, we said, what are the universal tools available to every rancher? Ryan, do you want to add anything on that?
I was just going to say, I know Vanessa's heard me say this like a handful of times. Apologies for any imperfections. We are still in year 0. If you run across anything, Vanessa, over the next year where this becomes problematic, we can make adjustments.
Yeah.
I don't see how it would be problematic, but if you do run into something, please just holler.
Yeah, will do. And maybe we can talk, separately just about some sort of unique situations we have, and pick your brains on which might be the more appropriate forms to use. So we can talk about that outside this meeting.
Right. Yeah, cool.
Yeah, and I really appreciate Ryan emphasizing that, because again, so Colorado is the first state to really do this kind of framework for anything but corn and soy. And so we're kind of the pioneers, and these aren't perfect.
Start calling you the architect, Helen. Yeah, and so to be clear, for the conservation districts that are here and the eligible entities, we will be setting up a process by which at the end of the year, and hopefully you guys, as you come across them, will just bring them to our attention.
Mhm.
But we'll have, hopefully at the end of the year, we'll have a list of how to improve all these forms and documents. I know, for example, Lynn would love PDFs of all of these. It's just, it hasn't been taken care of yet. We will continue to work on that.
Mhm.
But to be able to have, the producers really drive best management practices in the area, and the folks that are associated with that, it's important for everybody to know that we're trying to really make this a bottom-up driven program instead.
Yeah, and we can walk through some of the how to submit feedback. But again, so we in this particular question on the Google form, it says, do you have any of the following records for the past year? Check all that apply. These are pretty general. Photos or documentary evidence that key infrastructure has been maintained, evidence of monitoring results, annual grazing records, etc. So when you go back to the scoring sheet, it says, what type of records do you have? And it's scored based on how many of those you click. So at least 3 types of any of those records, as long as you check 3, you're going to get 6 points. If you don't have, and that would include annual grazing records because we're prioritizing that. If you have at least 3 types of records, excluding annual grazing records, you would get 4 points. So as technical conservation districts and technical assistance providers, you're not expected to score these on your own, but it might be helpful for you all to be more familiar with them. To be more familiar with the scoring sheet in case you get asked producer questions. So again, for instance, here, there's the detail that we're really incentivizing annual grazing records. The drought management plan is we start with the structure again of, do you have a written drought management plan? Yes or no. Again, we're incentivizing here who was involved in this. You are, and you can really knock it out of the park in terms of points here, in terms of who you involve. When was the last time the drought management plan was reviewed? Again, this is important, particularly given that we're in this very prolonged drought here. You can get a negative point here if you've never reviewed your drought management plan. But here, we'd like to see, a lot of folks that we've talked to have said, they're really reviewing it quarterly at least. This question around, have you completed preparatory actions, is really around, have you undertaken things like fixing pipes, watering tanks, making sure that other infrastructure is necessary to prepare for drought. We ask about whether you have a drought resource inventory in your drought management plan. This is, again, it's a little different than the resource inventories that we've talked about in the other sections, but it asks about, like, do you have alternative feeding supplies in the event of a drought? Are you looking at historic conditions of drought and what happened during that time? Do you have an inventory of your water infrastructure? We do talk about monitoring to determine drought. What type of monitoring are you doing in this regard? So are you looking at soil moisture? Are you looking at precip, rangeland conditions, weather forecast, etc.? This is one place where I think this is the only place that we get an actual fill in the blank question. So it might make sense for me to go to this part of the Google form. Sorry, guys. Google Forms are still a little clunky. So we ask, what are your critical dates for drought planning? And you must list 2 to receive credit. So this is the only place where you have a short type in question that will then get scored on the scoring sheet. And then we ask, are your critical dates in your drought planning, and what are your trigger events? Drought preparedness and response. This is, again, it's kind of like a check almost. If you didn't do anything in drought, hopefully it should be a flag that maybe there were some actions you should have taken. And then monitoring is, like, along with grazing plan, the place that you can score a lot of points. Brian, do you want to start off with the monitoring section?
Here or in the slides?
We're just going through the different questions on this.
Yeah. So it's really critical in ranching to make sure that we're monitoring in some way, shape, or form. And so we have various, and obviously land PKS, RAP, CRMI. This isn't an exhaustive list, right? These are just a handful that were picked out that were really good using reference conditions. But active monitoring really tells us not just if species are coming in and out, but we might have complete structural components that are moving in and out, right? And so monitoring, long-term monitoring like this tells us whether we're having a positive, negative, or net zero influence on the ecosystem. And so that if we continue to see things fall out structurally, we might, yeah, sorry about that. Sorry, I just saw the chat. Like I didn't explain any of that stuff. If entire structural groups are falling out of your ecosystem, it can set you up for crashes going forward. And so this is just really, are you taking assessment of that which is the foundation of your small business or large business? The short-term monitoring, it's hard to think of short-term monitoring that wouldn't be tied to the operational goals, because the short-term monitoring is really looking at animal behavior and animal condition, whether you're using a condition score or not. Some folks have told me that if you're using an animal condition score, by the time it's in a negative situation, you're already too late. But these short-term monitoring goals are critical to maneuver the weather conditions that happen seasonally, that the producers are going to react to. And again, the methods to determine if livestock need to be moved, right, is their measurement, obviously being the creme de la creme. If you could somehow measure your cattle on a regular basis, that would be your best indicator. Is utilization monitored after each grazing event? Really what we're looking at here, and you can see yes, all pastures, yes on some, and no is, are you taking stock? Is the producer taking stock after a grazing event to try and manage each paddock to the best of their ability? And then which methods do you monitor your utilization, right? Actual weight. There's a bunch of different things here, right? And you can read through them. I mean, there's just a ton of them. Stubble height, graze class, cattle browse method, paired plots are nice. And then let's see, does seasonal forage supply equal preferred forage demand? Yes, with no supplemental feeding. That's really where you know, if things are being, if everything's being taken into account as it should be, that's where most folks will be. Yes, seasonal supplemental feed, no, that's 0, and I'm sure 0. I think too, it's important to know that it can depend on where a producer is in their life, to be honest with you. We've met with producers who, when they first started out, they were so deep in debt, they beat their land up hard, right? And they had to pay the bills. And now that they're a little bit older, you know, their goals change. So I think it's important just to realize that, you know, we're not there to judge. You know, everybody's in a different spot, and their goals change with time as well. Do you monitor forage supply? Yes, on all pastures. Yes, on some, and no. You know, you can see there's not a whole lot of difference. Like it's 1 point between yes on some and yes on all. Not everybody monitors their forage supply. Not everybody does it on all their pastures, right? These are the things that kind of set people apart, right? And then the methods for your forage supply, whether it's visual with a photo, visual estimate with no photo, or line point intercept, gets different scoring there. The long term, and this is where we get into like line point intercept and things like that. Are you monitoring your bare ground, your cover and composition? What are the methods you use to measure those? And this part here, the monitoring, if you don't have expertise in this is really where the technical assistance providers can help play a big role. The rangeland technical assistance provider that we will pair with the district, this is their wheelhouse, right? I mean, this is their bread and butter, what they do on a regular basis. And so if you're looking at some of this stuff and you're like, I'm not a range person, I don't understand this. You know, please lean heavily on your technical assistance provider for that, because that's their area of expertise. So we get into, you know, in long-term monitoring, what we're wanting to monitor is bare ground, cover and composition, right? Your vegetation gaps and height and production. And the reason for that is if your bare ground is increasing, right, the number of growing plants on your range is decreasing, right? And so it might be, you know, your first thought might be, well, it's a drought, you know, you should have more bare ground, but that's why it's important to have a reference condition, right? If your reference site says, you know, your bare ground should be, you know, 43% and you're at 60, then we can infer that, you know, that difference in bare ground is caused by the grazing, potentially. And same thing with your cover and composition. Vegetation gaps are going to be directly associated with your bare ground. And then vegetation height production is really, that's looking at vigor, right? Are the nutrients cycling well through the system? Do I have a healthy ecosystem, right? Mm-hmm. And then management changes implemented as a result of monitoring. So if a producer's noticing, for example, my warm season grasses are starting to disappear, you know, and they make changes, that's going to be right. Using those long-term monitoring methods to make real substantive changes on the landscape is going to be incentivized in a big way.
And I misspoke earlier. That is the only other place where there is a I'll bring it up here, where there is a short answer question. Before I bring that up though, when you bring up the Google form, how you look at how you see these monitoring questions are going to look a little bit different than the normal check boxes. You're going to be able to say, for instance, how do you monitor cover and composition? You would say, I monitor cover and composition for every pasture And if that's what you do, you would choose the visual estimate or whatever method that you have. If you only do it on some pastures, you would check the method. And you would leave it blank if you do not monitor it. So again, this is the what to management practices changes if you implemented as a result of monitoring your land or your soil health, and you would the producer would fill in an answer here. And I just want to note that that's really heavily weighted. It's worth, if you list 2, it's worth 7 points. And if you list 1, it's worth 5 points.
Oh, sorry.
So I think we just threw a lot of information out at you.
So I was just actually going to say, if you're a conservation district and you're here today, or an eligible entity and you're here today, don't forget that, with the exception of this Monday, because it's President's Day, we do have a scheduled office hours for STAR from 11 to noon every Monday. Some of you that are on this call now have been on those meetings. So if between now and then you think of something, or you need help with something, please come to those Monday morning office hours, and we can help you guys navigate. I also, since I saw them on the call, Dusty, Aaron, how often do you guys suggest having those documents revised?
Well,
Grazing.
it kind of depends. This is Dusty. It kind of depends on the situation, but we like to do them annually, but at the very least every 3 years. We go through with the producers for our habitat management plans. We update their grazing management and things like that. And so, you know, I mean, every one of the producers, we try to do a 3-year outlook on them with like grazing plans, but with the understanding that every year that can change, you know what I mean? And so, yeah, does that answer your question?
So yeah, I just wanted to make sure we were kind of in line with what you guys were already doing.
Yep.
So, you know, again, like Ryan said, before going out, and we'll turn to the consultation now, but before going out and doing a consultation, I would just kind of review this scoring sheet, maybe click through the Google form. Again, it's not that you have to score them or look through any records. You shouldn't have to engage in any of that. It's really just in case questions come up while you're filling out the STAR form.
And as you can see, I mean, that really, if you can send them, if you and I put it in the chat, the link to the link to the CDA Soil Health website. They can always go on their computer or on their phone and just peruse those documents. This really is, in my opinion, the conversation starter, the scoring sheet, because it lets you know as when you're out doing the consultation, you know, what you're kind of looking for, and how it's going to impact their score. But I think, you know, there's going to be that moment where they say, well, you know, why is this scored this way, or is this scored that way? And hopefully we've given you at least some of those answers.
Yeah, and you can always reach out to us as well. So kind of turning back to the consultation form, I apologize about.
Could I just back up on,
Oh,
I'm sorry to interrupt,
yeah.
Helen. Could I just back up on what Ryan was saying?
Mm-hmm.
I have found it really helpful to tag team both of those forms with the producers, And I encourage them to go through the field form and just answer and know that they can get to the end and then clear all fields and clear it. But what I want to start is their thought process and their decision. And then, you know, as a backup on that, then the scoring sheet is an excellent way for them to synthesize the sorts of thought processes maybe that we want to steer them towards and how they make decisions for not only, you know, participating here, but with their other rest of the nation.
Yeah.
So I encourage them to look at this before we finalize it, to talk about how we want to proceed.
Yeah, that's a great point, Greg. If you can get folks to look at the star form and the scoring sheet beforehand, you know, I know we've been asked about printable versions. You can always hit Control P or go to print. It's Control P on my PC and select print. And if it's easier for the producer to look at it that way. However, there are going to be questions that like get cut off at the top. So it's probably
It'll
helpful
also
for
be
them. Go ahead, Ryan.
Oh, and it'll also be like 25 pages long.
Yeah, it's but folks should be able to print out, minimize the Excel sheet and print it out.
It's tough, and I've tried on both, and the scoring sheet is different for each discipline, and some fit on a page, some don't, some you have to cut and paste and whatnot. And boy, if we had PDFs that we could go through together, a hard copy together, would really be terrific. And I know Ryan indicated that you guys are working.
Yeah.
That would be really great help.
Yeah, we'll make that a priority. So something that should be easy to print and is not hopefully too technologically hard, which I know I struggle with technology, is the consultation form, which is, you know, really, again, it's about getting to know the producer. So what they'll do is if you want to print it out or save it as a separate Word copy, just asking some general information. There's a checklist at the beginning of this. So the checklist consists of, you know, hopefully completing this form, providing some guidance or some technical assistance if it's appropriate at this stage, completing the star field form, and then reviewing the producer match form are all things you're going to be doing during the consultation. So part one is really getting to know the rancher and kind of their interests and their goals around soil health. They might have different goals. They might be ecological, they might be financial, they might be social. Again, as Ryan said, this kind of just depends on where they are. It could really depend on where they are feeling it just basically in their life. Reviewing, what are they doing now for soil health? What's working? What are they maybe having some challenges about? What practices or other improvements have they considered trying, or would they be open to trying? You know, there are some really cool new technologies coming online with ranching, like virtual fencing, that could be a game changer for ranchers in terms of labor, precision grazing, et cetera. If you've wanted to try practices or make other improvements and you haven't, what have been your barriers to doing those? So choosing a part of the ranch to try new practices, again, as I mentioned with the croplands, those are really field-based. It's very straightforward. Ryan, jump in here if you want. With a ranch, it's going to be a little less straightforward.
Yeah, and I would just say, you know, at future trainings, we'll kind of get into what is a representative sample, what's representative of the ranch. And so what comes to mind specifically is a lot of times, calving will take place near the home, right? Makes sense because you can be close by with the young animals. But that's not a place you want to pick. It's going to be, it's not representative. It's going to be more, there's going to be more equipment on there for feed. There's going to be, lots more impoundment of animals in an aggregated area. And so this consultation will help you, kind of find out a little bit about the operation, so that when you decide to go out, and do an assessment, you're doing it on an area that's not more heavily used than other areas.
Yeah. So you might not want to choose as an area to try new practices, like Ryan was saying, an area that's used for calving, or something that's otherwise like a sacrifice area, that you'd have more barriers with. So then, talking with the producer about what are the concerns for this area? Do they have a spot where it's just highly eroded? Maybe they have a spot that's not highly eroded, but the forage quality or quantity isn't what they want it to be. Perhaps they've overgrazed it in the past and they want to rehabilitate that area, vegetation wise. We ask in the consultation form for you to talk with the producer about what the management of this area has looked like in the past, including grazing schedule and infrastructure. Hopefully this will help get at what they might want to change. Touching on, and this will go back to the STAR form, is this being managed pursuant to an existing conservation plan or drought plan? And of course, what are your goals? What do you want? What do you want from this part of your ranch? Choosing new soil health improvements for the operation. And again, this is a discussion of what new practices would you be willing to try?
Can I just reiterate something really quickly?
Yeah.
Because I think when we talk about the ranch, the ranch as a whole is a very large operation, but we're really trying to focus on the private land of the ranch.
Yes.
As opposed to, again, I just want to reiterate this. We don't want people going out and doing something that goes against a contract they may have with the Forest Service or BLM or something like that. So we're really trying to focus on the privately owned part of the ranch.
Yep. So then again, kind of revisiting, if you've identified certain things you'd like to try or build in this area, what might the constraints be? And then, as with the cropland consultation, kind of describing what the plan would be. This might not be something that you can fill out right away. And then hopefully this is helpful, but a list of what the conservation district or the eligible entity will be doing next to assist the producer, and what the producer's going to do next to kind of implement these practices.
There's a question in the chat. I just thought I'd go ahead and answer that really quickly. So Marta asks, they got an email from a producer asking if the program applied to leased land or acreage under federal grazing permits. They have a permit to graze on Monte Vista's refuge adjacent to their private lands. They're trying to assist the refugee manager in restorative grazing and other conservation measures. So leased land is allowed. The lease has to be at least through the duration of the program, right? So the lease has to be at least this next 3 years, so that we're not paying for something that disappears in year 1 or year 2. The federal grazing permits, again, those federal grazing permits are gonna come with their own, with their own needs, right? They're gonna have their own plans worked up for those grazing permits with the NRCS. And so we're really, as CDA, we could really only focus on private land.
Mhm.
Did that answer your question, Marta? I hope. Okay, cool. That was a good question, by the way.
Yeah, any other questions, comments, if folks have actually started engaging with producers, we can just kind of talk shop generally, if that'll be helpful.
Helen, this is Bill. Question about reimbursement. So we're going to use the same reimbursement sheet as for farms, right?
Sure.
And
Yep.
it seems to me with a ranch operation, maybe they won't be submitting those till the end of the growing season.
Brian, do
I
you?
guess I could.
Yeah, go ahead, Bill.
I guess maybe I should ask that in a different way. I'll ask some specific questions. Can the reimbursements be used for infrastructure like fencing that'll enable rotational grazing?
Yes, sir.
Can the reimbursements be used for management planning? In other words, there's a line item on the reimbursement sheet for labor. Could I develop a written drought management plan, and if that took me 6 hours, bill for that?
I would think so. And if you paid somebody to help you prepare a drought management plan or a grazing plan, that would be reimbursable too. I know we would like to, given the fact that a lot of this, some of this money was stimulus money, we'd like to get it out the door before the end of June. So yeah, I would encourage billing for, the other thing to take into consideration is, let's say somebody went to ranching for profit. That's something they can get some partial reimbursement for.
Mhm.
Did they go to any meetings or conventions or things of that nature where they were educating themselves on soil health? Those are also things that those educational components about management are also all things that they can bill for.
Mhm. Yeah, so with the producer match, we really wanted to be inclusive, particularly on the ranching side. You all, this document should hopefully look familiar to you. The list of covered practices was sent out to you. We realized when we were putting this together that it's not going to be exhaustive. So we list some common NRCS practices that will be covered. Grazing land, mechanical treatment, range planting. But we also have listed additional practices, and then again, hopefully reiterated that this is not exhaustive of things that are covered.
Ready for another question or two?
Yep, absolutely.
I have a question. When they ask how soon, so let's say we go through the process and they get a score of 3 stars, but they say, oh, I'm really anxious to get going on my this plan and that plan, and they go ahead and get it done within, a relatively short period of time. How can they be re-rated? How soon can they be re-rated to get more stars?
So, Lynn, I would say if you run into that situation, I would say, let's do the consultation. Let's do the soil sampling. Let's hold off on the field form until you have those documents in hand. And we'll rescore at that time.
Mhm.
With the grazing land component, we're not pigeonholed into, I gotta get seed in the ground by, March 14th or, May 28th or whatever your date might be in that field. So we have a little more flexibility. But again, the specifically for the conservation and innovation grant districts and recipients, there are some stimulus funds tied to that, and we need to get those out, as soon as possible. So I would, and again, that management plan or grazing plan or drought plan, the time and the money spent getting those prepared can definitely be used as in-kind match.
Okay,
This-
so just so I
this is-
understand, you say wait to come up with the final scoring rate until after we move through those.
I would, if
steps.
somebody's, if, I would, Lynn, if somebody's looking at trying to get that turned around in a 2 to 4 week period of time, I would go ahead and just wait. And if it's, if it's, I mean, I know we've all been there where, somebody says they're gonna do something and the turnaround isn't there. I would set a hard deadline for that and then go get a score done. We can reevaluate next year, right?
Yeah.
The whole point of this program is to move, from 1 star to a 5 or as close as we can get as possible, if that fits into the goals of the producer. So I would hate to say that we have to have scores in by, June 30th or something. If you can work with that and you and I can communicate about that and kind of work through it. I think we can massage that situation, I guess is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you.
I think we know that in the ranching world, there's a significant need for planning resources that aren't there. So certainly something that, like, if someone's gung ho, we want them to go do that and to assist with it.
Okay, great. Thank you.
This is Bill again. Another
Yeah.
reimbursement question. Like the farm programs under Star Plus, reimbursements are not tied to the scoring. Is that correct?
No. Mm-mm. Yeah.
All right. And
Yeah.
and then the follow-up to that is review with me for the ranching grazing. What is the minimum and what is the maximum reimbursement that and then of course the producer still needs to match that, I'm assuming.
Your matches, your mins and your maxes are all still the same, right? So you're still looking at a maximum of $5,000 or $75 per acre.
So with a few acres, you're looking at 1,000 and your maximum will be 5,000 divided by 75 or more. Okay. And then
Do you have many 2-acre grazing plots, Bill?
don't know yet. So we'll do our first grazing
Okay.
grazing interview, I hope next week. So and that kind of gets me to my next question. Are contracts with the scope of work out yet? Because
No.
I think we kind of need to see that flow to the conservation districts before we have authority to say, we're really signing up this producer for the season.
And all I can tell you there is that we got the NRCS contract last week. And the people in-house at CDA are going through the signatures and getting that figured out. Nikki's Nikki's working like crazy and riding them pretty hard, trying to get these things out as soon as possible. My guess is that I would like to see them done by the end of the month. That's my hope. But I can't, I mean, I have no control over it, and I don't know. We haven't been given a timetable, I guess is what I'm saying. Keep getting told 2 weeks.
Thank you.
Sorry about that, Bill.
Okay, great. Well, I'm happy to,
So
Give-
we just,
oh, go ahead.
sorry, Helen, we just had another question in the chat. It says, does a higher star score give the producer a better shot at getting into the program? Or is the score sheet only for producers who are already in the program? So the star score comes well after producer selection. And no, there's no influence there. The point is to make change on the landscape. Those, not that we don't have some producers who might score higher than others, but the point is to try and make an impact and get folks to try something new that they haven't done for a soil health benefit. And so we really tried to take all comers. And when we selected conservation districts, we tried to get a really good geographical sample of the state, as well as production values or methods. And so, no, I would like to see, I mean, I'm hoping that, you know, there's a good distribution, right, of people just starting out, folks that might be a little further along, and you know, a handful of people that are doing really, really well. And to boot, what we're focused on today is really what we call Star Plus. This is with money involved, conservation districts involved. Any producer can go on the soil health webpage and fill this stuff out on their own and get their own star. There's no money there, but they'll get a star sign and a rating. And those will, you know, when market signals do start to present themselves, or, you know, maybe they're a direct to consumer seller, they can put that on their packaging. The cottage industry, you know, we're trying to support that as well, I think. So the score is irrelevant. It's really all about trying to get dollars out on the landscape to create change.
Yeah, so as like background, we're really hoping that STAR, once it gains some more momentum, and it is gaining momentum nationally and in the Western United States. Of course, we're right at the beginning, and Colorado in some ways is the lucky guinea pig with this, which is great, and also comes with challenges. You know, we're hoping that this becomes a market signal in the future that you know, again, hopefully doesn't I'll part with these words, and I'm happy to stay on for a few minutes if folks have other questions, but hopefully we've constructed a framework that's not arbitrary, in the sense that it's really rewarding producer tools and engagement as opposed to any particular type of practice, etc. So.
Yeah, and I would just add that, you know, we're trying to be inclusive. We're not trying to. I think there's a lot of muscle memory on the landscape from NRCS programs, and we're trying to not be that.
Are you guys taking questions at this point? We have a few.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
Ryan,
Okay.
can you stay on?
So,
Yep.
yeah, just for a sec. So just to review, the scoring sheet, okay, we do the, they call it the Google form. The Google form needs to be completed first, and then that gets sent to Ryan to get ranked. At that point, then as soon as you hire the consultants, then that would be the next step. Is that correct? But do we need to wait till the contracts are done by the end of the month is what you're hoping before we should move forward with that?
So I mean, I don't think you need to hire consultants. I'm a little confused by that. Give me a little bit of,
Okay, I thought you guys were hiring cropland and rangeland consultants to come out and do 4 of these with each district. That's what I mean, sorry. Is that correct?
yeah, so that email will be sent out today. So yeah, we've compiled a list. So your district will get one cropland. They've already actually volunteered. And so you will get an email that puts you in contact with the technical assistance provider in your area. You'll have one rangeland and one cropland specialist. So they already exist. We've already had multiple conversations with them. And you'll be receiving contact info. And then our hope is that by the end of next week or the end of the month, that you make contact with that technical assistance provider and you guys can get something scheduled.
Okay, so the biggest thing is right now that to be doing the Google form with the ones we selected, and then you would do the score sheet, and then the consultant comes.
So what I would do is I would schedule something with your technical assistance provider.
Okay,
They are going to go out with you to the producer, do a consultation with you, which is going through the consultation form. You'll go through the field form together. They will help you take a soil sample and send that in. Right?
okay,
And if you can't sample the soil right now because it's frozen, then you'll go out at a later date and do that. But the technical assistance provider will go out with you. Most of these folks work with either the Ag Experiment Station, Extension, or NRCS, and they have a history of doing these types of things. And so what they're going to probably share with you is, kind of what's the foundation of a good consultation? What are we doing here? And how do we go about, doing this in a manner that's sensitive to the producer's needs, and things like that. So it should be, when you go out there, there'll be a consultation, a field form filled out, right? Ideally, then a soil sample would be taken at that time as well and sent to the lab.
okay. And then at what point do we do the Google forms? Do they just need to do that before the consulting? Does that?
They can, but I would, again, like I said, I would go out with your technical assistance
First,
provider.
okay,
I would send them the information, right? So that they can go through this stuff on their own in their own time
Sure.
before you get out there. But then once you get there, the technical assistance provider should be able to help you with the consultation form and the field
Okay.
form. And as you're
Gotcha.
going through the field form, you would be able to kind of score it as you go, so that you kind of have an idea of what you're looking at, when
Okay.
you finish. That would be the full picture. And then you would go out to the area that had been designated by the producer as the area that they wanted to enroll, and you would take a soil sample.
okay. And then I guess I have a question on the resource location. I know, Ryan, I talked to you about one of them. Is that going to be done differently with the resource site, or?
So your I'm brain farting. Your reference site, is that what you're talking about?
Reference site, yeah.
Yeah, so at the training on the 29th, we will go in depth into how, is there a reference site in your area? And if not, how do we create one on land PKS or something like that? The idea there is that to evaluate something, you need to have a reference, right? If you've never seen an automobile before, and I pull up in some, drop top jalopy that doesn't have a top on it and it's all rusty and beat to crap, that would be your reference from what an automobile looks like, right? And so it's important that when we evaluate these ranges, we do so with the idea that there's a reference condition, that there's a place nearby that hasn't had the impact that you're going to see on the landscape, and that the potential is being met, I guess, right? So if you've only gotten 7 inches of moisture in a year, right, that land that you're evaluating might have let's say a potential mass of 150 pounds per acre, right? But if you'd gotten 47 inches of water, that same piece of ground would have a higher potential, right? You might be at 2,500 pounds an acre or something like that. And so the reason why the reference site is important is because it allows you to evaluate something given the climate that has, impacted. Usually it's drought, right? But sometimes we have really wet years, right? You walk out there and you're like, wow, that's great. When I was in the valley last summer, I was in the San Luis Valley, and we were at a land PKS training, and somebody was like, wow, this is beat. And I'm like, this is the best I've ever seen the valley look, right? I've been going down there for almost a decade. And so I guess what I'm saying is we always have these internal references that can lead to bias. And so it's always important to have a reference site or a reference condition that you're gauging again.
Yeah.
And I saw that Helen put something in the chat that goes into greater depth of what we're talking about.
Yeah. So Jenny, just to be clear, like, you aren't required to go find a reference site or to use land PKS, but this is a tool that we're hoping more producers will use, and so we want to provide some training on it. But it's not something that you need to do when you're first engaging with the producer, except for potentially, knowing what a reference site is, which again is kind of a, I don't know that it's basically a site has been free of human influence for a very long time, at least pre-European. But what I just put in the chat is land PKS. If you click around on this website, you'll be able to get a sense of the technology. And there's an app for your cell phone that you can actually go out and take it and work with it in the field.
Okay, because I did have one individual interested in having his location, his land in this. Because I understood there had to be one per district. Is that correct, Ryan, that they would like to do?
What,
as a
one
resource
what?
site? One location for the resource. Maybe I'm saying it incorrectly. Was it a resource? I think I talked to you about it, the CCTA, the resource
The
or
reference condition, the
reference site, sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Is-
so
is
one, go ahead.
Is each awarded district supposed to have one?
So I know
That's-
we're over time, but I'm happy to stay on and kind of walk through what a reference site is, if folks want to stay on, or are happy to leave. And so
Yeah, and I think the other thing too is Jenny, to understand, when we have the training on the 29th, we'll probably have about a half day of classwork on this, going into ecological site descriptions and what is a reference site and how to use land PKS. There's or RAP. There are it's just like, you download Word with Friends, you can download land PKS, and you can actually generate some reference conditions, because like if if we're talking about the western slope, there wasn't a lot of reference sites created for the western slope. And so, coming up with ecological site descriptions or ESDs, can be difficult. So we'll tackle that a little more at a later training, but that's a reference site is just, so you may, Jenny, you may have a reference site nearby, right? Nick Charchalis, for example, when we were out with him, I don't know if he's still on, but when we went out with him, there's actually a reference site right near town. And so he would drive by it every day on the way to his range. And so that's very convenient for him, right? I mean, he can drive by what the ecological site description of his place actually should look like. So he can actually drive by that, look and see, how does my land compare to what's over here? Oh, I'm sorry. There's a question. Is the training on the 29th to the 31st? Both days. The eastern slope training will be on the 29th at the Chatfield, the Denver Botanical Gardens Chatfield Farm location. And then there will be one on the western slope at the Orchard Mesa. There's a conference room there.
So,
Could she possibly mean the research site, Ryan?
oh,
Yes,
That's
yes,
what I think.
that's,
Yes,
I think what I'm talking about.
okay.
Sorry, I'm sorry. Yes, that's exactly what I'm trying to explain.
Oh,
I
okay.
have,
thought
okay, that's, sorry, I was not saying it incorrectly. That's what I mean, Ryan, sorry. I have an individual that wants to do that, is interested, so that's what I was trying to,
Okay, no, that's great.
sorry.
Yeah, so Jenny, we should touch base and set up an appointment so that we can talk with Jim Ippolito and Megan McMuller, who are the primary researchers on these grants. And just have a quick phone interview with the producer and make sure everything's in line with what we want to be doing, and we'll sign them up with research focus field.
Okay, yes, research, sorry. Okay, I will send you his email, information, phone number, and we can go from there. Sorry, guys, that's what I was trying to explain.
no
I'm trying to
problem.
be a better listener, Jenny, and I probably.
That's okay.
No, I think it raised a really good topic of discussion, which is we are going to have a training on some of these on reference conditions in March. So,
Thank you, Lynn.
Anything else? Any other lingering questions? Well,
So
I did
want to say, because I noticed that Natalie is on. And I was going to send her an email, but since she's here, I was just going to let her know. And for those people that are interested, Natalie had asked me the other day if, for the equipment grant, if towers for virtual fencing would be acceptable. And we met as a team this morning and decided that absolutely it would be. Line of sight on those towers is pretty expansive. And so 2 towers, if the line of sight is there, it could actually cover a lot of ground. So I just thought that's going to be pretty exciting development in the world of ranching. Is if people aren't familiar with it, kind of like the old dog shock collars, the fences that we had, electric fences we had from years ago. The cow wears a collar. The collar has a GPS signal. And so you can, rather than running physical fences across your property, you can create these fences on an app on your phone or iPad or computer. And the collar will actually make a noise. And that tone gets faster and louder as they approach the edge of that virtual fence. And then there's a shock generated if they try and cross it. And so they learn to associate that tone with something that they don't like. And so it's a way that they can monitor their herd from a distance, as opposed to having to go out there and move fencing on a regular basis or have cross fencing built and all that stuff. So it's a pretty exciting development, and there are a handful of districts that are working with it. And so for those that haven't heard of it, that's kind of what we're talking about. And And for Natalie, I know she's pretty excited to have that. So
Thanks, Ryan. Super excited to hear that update. Just talked with one of my producers this morning and he will be over the top hearing that. So thank you.
that's awesome. And the cool thing is, I was talking with Les this morning at our meeting, and he was like, the Vens people will actually come out and do an assessment of your entire area, your whole landscape. And I'm assuming it would be your region up there. And they would tell you where to put the towers to get the most amount of coverage. So I just think it's great. I mean, the thought that occurs to me is that, Natalie, you might even be able to cover people that aren't even necessarily directly involved in STAR. And so the ability to impact so many people in the area is kind of exciting.
Very exciting, Ryan. We had some of that conversation this morning, and the producer I spoke with, he was saying that he thinks, again, it's line of sight, but it depends a little bit. It can go up to like 10 miles. So we were thinking,
Yeah.
2 or 3 towers in our region could cover many of our ranching operations. So we're stoked down here.
That's awesome. That's so cool.
Okay, great. So thank you everybody for coming, and as always, Ryan and I are available to answer questions as things come up, and you should be getting an email with your technical assistance providers. If it's not already in your inbox, it'll be there very
I
shortly.
haven't sent them out yet, but I will.
I'm
I will
sorry,
shortly.
Ryan. Okay,
That's okay.
perfect. Okay, have a
And-
great rest
and-
of the day, guys. Oh, go
Can I-
ahead,
Can
Ryan.
I just ask can I ask one person to stay after class? Dave Deerstein, can you stay for a few minutes?
I sure can.
Sweet.